Good morning, friends. Today we are going to learn the next part 7th of Neoclassical Criticism Preface to Shakespeare. In the previous part, we learned about the good things in Shakespeare's comedies, tragedies presented by Samuel Johnson. He also talked about the demerits of Shakespeare in his preface to Shakespeare. In neoclassical criticism, he tries to compare the particular writers with Shakespeare. He talked about the Shakespeare's comedies and tragedies and also compared how tragedies plot and the comedy's plot is different from each other. Now we can understand, and this is the about three unities of Shakespeare. Next part of three unities, chorousness of dialogues. Shakespeare's plays also have faults of dialogue and diction. The dialogues in the comedies are exposed to objection when the characters are made to engage in contexts of wit and sarcasm. Many of their jests are generally indecent and gross, and there is much licentiousness and indelicacy even where ladies join the conversation. So there is coarseness, coarseness of dialogues in Shakespeare's plays. He, the Samuel Johnson, point out the faults of dialogues and diction in Shakespeare. Even the refined characters speak on the same level as the clowns, and often all distinction between the two is lost. Whether this was the real conversation of ladies and gentlemen of his period is difficult to say, but the coarseness of this conversation in Shakespeare's plays cannot be approved. It is the writer's duty to make suitable selection, even in the forms of gaiety. Here we can understand how Shakespeare mixed all the characters and never given the particular weightage to ladies and the other characters in the comedies. The clowns also have the same kind of dialogues in his comedies. So there is coarseness of this conversation in Shakespeare's plays cannot be approved. Performance is in tragedies worse when more labor is spent. In his tragedies, Shakespeare's performance is the worst when he seems to have spent the most labor. When he works hard to be effective, the result is unimpressive, tedious, and obscure. Next part is about undue verbosity and prolixity of words. The narrative parts of Shakespeare's plays show up undue pomp of diction and verbosity, full of repetition. Instead of enlivening the narration by making it brief, Shakespeare endeavors to make it effective through dignity and splendor. So, here we can understand how the use of words is full of verbosity and full of repetition. There is no small or brief narratives in Shakespeare. Flamboyant speeches, inflated vocabulary. Shakespeare is having flamboyant speeches and inflated vocabulary, according to Samuel Johnson. The said speeches in some of his plays are dispiriting, cold, and feeble. It appears that, as Shakespeare's powers were natural, he performs badly whenever he endeavors to create a particular effect deliberately. Often he seems to be involved in some unwieldy sentiment, which he seems unable to express and unwilling to draw. Complexity or intricacy of language does not always accompany of thought, subtlety of thought. Quite often, the quality of words does not correspond to that or the thought or image for which they were employed. So, here we can understand there is inflated vocabulary in Shakespeare's plays. Trivial sentiments and vulgar ideas are, at times, clothed in sonorous epithets and high sounding images. He often loses the heights of poetic loftiness by the use of some ideal conceit or dry equivocation. In such cases, terror and pity are degraded into a sort of frigidity. Thus, the intense feelings aroused by him suddenly loses their intensity and become weak. Craze for puns or word play. Lastly, Shakespeare could never resist a quibble, whatever be the occasion of the dialogue, whether the situation be amusing or tense. Shakespeare seizes the opportunity of employing a pun. Love of quibbling misleads Shakespeare just as the will o' the wisp misleads the traveler in marshy places. See, he never used the plain dialogues but tried to wordplay in every situation of the play. A quibble is, after all, a trivial thing, but it had such a fascination for Shakespeare that he would sacrifice reason, propriety, prop, and truth for its sake. It is to him like the golden apple for which he would always turn aside from his path. His fatal Cleopatra, for which he would lose the world and be content to lose it. He was prepared to spoil his whole play for the sake of quibble. See, here Samuel Johnson criticized the use of quibble of Shakespeare. He point out how the character of Cleopatra become fatal because of this quibble. Use of this quibble or a trivial thing or the use of wordplay is important for Shakespeare. Thank you. Here we can understand how the Shakespeare used the words, used the particular dialogues, and it is not proper according to Samuel Johnson. He point out the particular plot sections and writing of the plot, but Shakespeare failed to prove that prove for that particular plots. Shakespeare never used a particular dialogue structure, use of his wordplay, use of his trivial things in major situations also is important, and Samuel Johnson point out minute things of Shakespeare's plays and his use of dialogues, his use of words, his use of characters, and his plays are not worthy in all situations or not ideal one according to Samuel Johnson. Here we end for this part of Preface to Shakespeare. In next part we learn about the next part of the Preface to Shakespeare. Till then, thank you.